Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Another weekend perspective as we move into October. We're in the last quarter of the year, fourth quarter of the year. Hope everybody's doing well. As I mentioned on the last weekend perspective, a lot of our time, at least my time and Aaron's time, I think to a certain extent, feel like lately we've been, doing normal work and doing podcasts, but, really kind of keeping an eye on what's been going on in kind of all over the Southeast United States. For us in particular, Western North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee, the places that were just unbelievably impacted by Hurricane Helene, which came through last weekend. Just for anybody who follows hurricanes and natural disasters and so forth, this was sort of Hurricane Katrina level destruction to an area of our state, an area of the world that incredibly beautiful, but also we're, as we find out, incredibly fragile in terms of just, what happens when extreme weather happens and extreme situations happen. So, again, we'll put a link in the show notes if anybody is seeing the pictures or, just would like to help in some way. That those areas of the country are going to, be kind of trying to get back to normal. It's going to take months and months, if not, years in some cases for some of these towns that, houses were demolished, entire towns were demolished, water systems, electrical systems, destroyed and ruined and all sorts of things. So, kind of heavy hearts lately with that. But, again, we're starting to see just incredible amounts of generosity from around the country and around the world. We're seeing people from, other parts of the United States, from Canada, from other places that are coming to try and help. So we're all very, very thankful for all of that. So anyways, want to get to our topic for today. What I wanted to talk about, and I'm recording a couple of shows here because, as I mentioned on the thing, I've been traveling quite a bit. I'm doing, I think, 10 to 12 days in a row. So I've got to record a couple of these shows back to back. So if my voice sounds the same as opposed to maybe different from week to week, it's because I'm trying to get ahead of this a little bit before all the travel, international travel and so forth. So what I want to talk about today, though, is 5 things from an AI perspective that are on my mind lately, and some things that I think are worth kind of keeping an eye on just in the near term. I think are going to have some impact on how people begin to use the technology, what people are doing to evaluate the technology, the various technology options that are out there, as well as a few little trends that I think, depending on if they go to the left or to the right, or if they get bigger or smaller, will have a longer term impact on how AI is used, and in particular AI in business in particular. So I want to dig into that right after the break.
AI may be the most important new computer technology ever, but AI needs a lot of processing speed, and that gets expensive fast. Upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is the single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. Do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic. Take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/cloudcast. oracle.com/cloudcast.
Welcome back to the Cloudcast. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, another weekend perspective. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I want to dive a little bit into 5 things in the AI space that I'm kind of digging into right now. And it feels like sort of a weird topic to do because, quite honestly, if you've been following what's going on in the AI space, which is kind of incredibly difficult these days. There's so much going on between new models coming out every couple months to, funding rounds for companies to, the movement of people and all sorts of things going on. It's hard to just kind of figure out where do you focus, where do you spend your time, how much time do you have to dig into stuff, and, how much is real, how much, can you start playing with and using right away, how much takes a long time to get used to it. But I've got 4 or 5 things, 5 or 6 things that I've been kind of digging into. And again, these are sort of relevant to me, it feels like. Your mileage may vary in that space, and there may be lots of other things that you're interested in. We'd love to hear where you guys are focusing your time, if at all, on AI. If it's something that relates to you, relates to your business, relates to trying to help you be better at your job, whatever it might be. But here's the 5 or 6 things that I'm kind of digging into. The first one is less a technology and more kind of a perspective or a kind of an observation based on some conversations I had this past week with just some companies, some larger scale companies that are looking to use AI within their business. This was a conversation, a large regulated industry. It doesn't really matter exactly which one it is, but what sort of surprised me, and I guess it shouldn't surprise me, because again, it feels like things are moving so fast. But I have to remember we are still very much, we're coming up on just 2 years of people actually using or having the availability of large language models. Right, ChatGPT sort of launched roughly Thanksgiving of 2022. So we're still not even 2 years into this technology, and again, lots moving, lots evolving. But the conversation was such that we were talking about what plans they were intending to, how they were planning to use technology, what they were exploring, what they were looking at, and he sort of described a scenario to me, and he basically said, I want to get all the advantages of what large language models can potentially do, and we were talking mostly in the context of things like chatbots or that type of interaction and user experience. And he was saying, look, I'd like to help make my teams more productive. I'd like to be able to interact with with our customers and our partners in new ways that potentially reduce cost, and a lot of the sort of traditional kind of augment your workforce, augment your applications type of things. And then he said, but what I'm really looking for is to figure out how can I make sure that even if we put good governance, kind of good data ingestion and good governance policies in place, he goes, I know just given, how big we are, we're not an unusual, size enterprise. And, we have lots of organizations doing different things. They move at different paces. They follow the rules in some cases, in other cases, they don't. He said, no matter what sort of governance we have in place, he said, we're going to make mistakes. And I totally agree with him. Like, mistakes happen. And he said, how do you expect that when a mistake is realized, if somebody realizes, oops, we weren't supposed to put that data into the model, we weren't supposed to train it or align it on that data, how we get it out, right? Like, essentially, how do we get it out? And then how do we roll it back to kind of before that information? And the reason I highlight this is, as I was sort of talking to him and listening to him, it dawned on me that there's a perception, and again, I'm not sure how consistent this is in places, but I feel like it's so new that it doesn't surprise me that this perception came up, because it, to a certain extent, if you were to describe an LLM, you can think of it, I guess, an analogy, and somebody will correct me and tell me this is way off base, but it's sort of like a database, right? Like it stores a bunch of information, and it's going to have certain characteristics or certain capabilities that you can, kind of build application-like capabilities on top of it, right? At the simplest level. And what it was clear that he was explaining was he expects it to have all of this knowledge or this capability to do LLM transformer-like capabilities, right? Where essentially it generates new content, right? Generative AI, it generates new stuff, but he also wants it to have sort of the correctness and the precision of a database, but also he wants to sort of treat the data input and the data inside of it, the neural network inside of it, as if it's like rows and tables of a database, in which he could just simply, issue a couple of SQL commands and get rid of some rows and tables, right? Sort of act like a DBA. And so the first thing that I'm kind of keeping an eye on is, do business leaders or technical leaders, whatever it might be, but those people that sort of have to straddle the fence between business leaders and technical leaders, do they really kind of grasp what LLMs can do at this point, can do or can't do at this point? And what are some of the big misperceptions that they may have that are going to drive their asks of their technology teams, asks of their application teams, asks of their vendors and other people and so forth. But I'm very, very curious, and I'd love to hear people's feedback, is, what fundamental kind of things are you hearing that people are getting wrong about AI technology, right? And I don't mean in the sense of like, oh, they're predicting it to do these amazing things, and maybe they won't get there in 5 years, or maybe they won't get there in 3 years, or whatever it might be. But what really sort of fundamental things are you hearing people say that you're like, no, that's it's not that it's incorrect. It fundamentally doesn't work that way. And if your perception is that it will work that way, you're going to struggle to grasp what's possible, but also what, how it'll work, how it'll operate, how you'll have to secure it, how it'll fit into your organization. So I use that little example as one that was sort of just kind of jumped out at me as like, oh, okay, there is still a massive amount of education to happen, even at the most basic level for people, because this stuff is new. It's a strange concept to sort of say, well, I have this source of information that has been trained on all this data, and yet can't really treat it like a database, which is the sort of most, straightforward analogy you might make or comparison you might make to something that stores a lot of data that you've given as data, right? So I think we're gonna go through some things that people thinking they are databases, and the results that come out of them are sort of exact, and they have the precision that databases do today, when they really don't, or they're not the same level of precision, right? And you're not going to manage the data the same way. So that's the first thing I had on my list. Second thing I've got on my list is I'm very much sort of watching, the debate between sort of large language models, small or smaller language models, and the sort of, one size fits all model. And which again is sort of another name for maybe like a frontier model or a state of the art largest language model. And the reason I say that is because, while things like OpenAI or GPT-4, GPT-5, 4.0, whatever the latest of that is, or Gemini or Llama, kind of the biggest, most state of the art ones, the ones that are, we're seeing from Facebook and OpenAI and Google and others that we know are costing hundreds of millions of dollars to train, and will very soon be costing billions of dollars to train. When I talk to companies about this, and you start to get into like more business or enterprise types of use cases, and you go like, how are you expecting to help influence the model on your data? How are you trying to steer it towards things that are relevant to your business or to your use case? And also, where do you expect to run the model if you're going to use it in conjunction with your application? Do you expect to run it on premises? Do you have GPUs available to you? Do you know what the cost of even training or influencing or aligning, right? Fine tuning a model might be, and in many cases they start to go, I'm not expecting to spend millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, I'm looking for stuff that, again, we might train once and maybe periodically train once a year, or use sort of a RAG pattern with something. And so it does feel like we're seeing, or at least I'm starting to see more and more companies that are coming to the realization that they may end up actually having a number of small models as opposed to sort of one uber model or one very, very large model. In the same way that if you ask somebody, where's your database? And they would say, well, we don't have a database. We have, dozens and dozens of databases around the company. It just depends on the application and the team and the use case and all that. It does feel like people are starting to realize, because of the economics and because of all the different ways in which you're trying to give it your flavor of your business, smaller models may end up becoming much more relevant across enterprises and so forth, at least, in environments in which you're trying to bring your data to them as opposed to just buying a plugin for your call center or something like that. Third thing I had in my mind, as we're seeing, we're recording this on October 2nd, I think yesterday it was announced, or today it was announced, that OpenAI had just taken on a huge new round of funding, I think around $6 or $6.5 billion. It's going to be very, very interesting to see if at that level, we see a huge new wave of funding for everybody else, right? The Anthropics of the world, or a new round of startups and so forth. Or if we see this be kind of a pause for the venture capital industry to say, well, those are huge stakes. OpenAI, while they're making money, aren't profitable by any means. In fact, if you sort of extrapolate out, their costs versus their revenues or even their projected revenues, they potentially could be looking to take this kind of money every single year or even larger amounts of this money every single year because they haven't, quite figured out how to monetize the extreme amounts of cost they have in building these models. So I think this is going to be an interesting sort of lighthouse moment if we see this kick off a flood of new funding versus, create sort of a pause to figure out, whether this is actually working out. And it's an interesting question because if you are somebody who's competing against potentially OpenAI, and whether OpenAI is still going all in with Microsoft or Microsoft's all in with them, but if you are a Google, if you're an Amazon, if you're a Facebook, could be IBM, could be Oracle, could be any of the really large players, do you risk potentially getting far behind, right? Sort of following the Jensen Huang mantra of you can't get too far behind the state of the art, or do you say it feels like the funding, even as interest rates start to come down a little bit, is getting too big or too far ahead of unprofitability, right? And it's a tricky situation because we've seen many companies in tech that have gone on to become huge start off as very unprofitable for a while. Amazon sort of famously the case, and then become profitable at some point in time and wildly profitable. And at the point that happened, they had already taken on massive amounts of market share. So it's an interesting sort of game of cat and mouse that's being played, but it does feel like this is kind of a make or break moment. And we'll see which way the industry goes there. Fourth thing I had on my list is, does anything or any company start to reduce our dependency on NVIDIA GPUs, right? Do we, we've talked a number of times over the last month, 2 months about the struggles at Intel. We really haven't heard lots and lots from AMD. I mean, we hear a few things here and there, but not, kind of earth changing, industry changing news from them, just kind of periodic updates. And so it is, does sort of make you wonder, like, is this the path we're going down for a period of time in which this new technology, which is trying to find use cases, is trying to find breakout scale and so forth, is dependent on the most expensive computing in history. And oh, by the way, there's only one source of that at this point, or at least one really viable source of that. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see, how quickly the industry responds, whether it's in finding alternative ways to create GPUs, whether it's chip vendor level, ARMs, Qualcomms, whoever of the world, or somebody comes up with new technologies that are better at leveraging high-end CPUs, which are more readily available, to create, train, and build the next generation of these models. So I'll be very, very interested in that. I don't know that we'll necessarily see anything like that in the next quarter or two. But that's one of those things in our industry that feels like I don't want to call it a monopoly, but a choke point that feels very untenable for it to scale, to the cloud, mobile, internet sort of thing that you would expect for sort of the next big thing. Fifth thing on my list is, really just trying to, and I, again, love to give people's feedback. What are sort of the top 10 revenue generating AI apps, right? We know that ChatGPT is probably one of them in terms of revenue and number of users. Something like GitHub CoPilot, we know, any of the developer assistant types of tools tend to be doing relatively well and people are paying for them. But beyond that, what are the top 5, top 10, right? And I ask this in the sense of, trying to understand, and again, I don't mean like, there's technology behind the scenes at Facebook and Google that is helping to, better serve ads at more cost-effective ways. I'm looking for things that, end users, businesses, enterprises, consumers are able to use, and the companies are making money on them, not necessarily just like a free type of offering. So really curious what those are. Something I'm going to be kind of digging into, because again, I think the hard part about AI right now for a lot of people to wrap their head around is like, what are the best use cases? What are the things that we should be spending our time on? Because the cost of experimentation is not cheap by any means, right? That was sort of the cornerstone of why like cloud computing took off, was the ability to experiment, the ability to try things was relatively inexpensive. That's not the case with AI and with GPUs and so forth. But then figuring out what are those top 5, top 10 things that people are paying for and that they're seeing positive business impacting results from. Kind of would love to know what those are. So if people have insights onto those, or just want to let us know what you're using, I'd love to hear it. Show at thecloudcast.net. And bonus, number 6 that I've got on my list, really kind of, starting to explore, very curious about what the framework is going to be, framework or sort of, I got sort of air quotes, middleware that unlocks the next breakthroughs in AI, right? Because we know at this point, what the infrastructure of AI is going to look like. We've seen, at least, there's plenty of models that are very, very capable of doing a lot of things. But what are going to be those next programming paradigms, next frameworks, next middleware that are really going to unlock how people sort of program against AI, right? Not just build the models, but sort of program the things, whether it's agentic or something else. It's LangChain, it's whatever it might be. What are those things going to be? What are those patterns going to be? What are going to be the breakthroughs in again the sort of paradigm of how people are going to build AI applications? And so I don't necessarily have a prediction at that point. I'm really curious. I'm kind of digging in. I'm looking at a lot of things across the industry, and again, would love to sort of get people's feedback on what they're seeing is trending in that space and those areas. So those are my 5 or 6 things that I'm kind of keeping an eye on. Like I said, there are dozens and dozens that are people are keeping their eye on. Would love to hear the areas that are really interesting to all of you. Whether you'd love to hear us interview people and explore them for you, or whether you've got really good feedback and experience that you'd like to share with us. So again, show at thecloudcast.net. We'd love to hear your feedback, or hit us up on one of the social media channels, DMs, whatever it might be. So anyways, with that, I'll wrap it up. Hope everybody's doing well. Another weekend perspective. I'm going to be traveling for, like I said, the next 2 weekends. So, I'm doing my best to get these out. If I sound a little tired, if I sound a little bit hoarse, I apologize for that. But doing my best to sort of stay on track with all these. And, there's just so many interesting things going on in the industry. So it's hard to keep us away from wanting to do these every week. So anyways, hope everybody's doing well. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for helping us grow the show. We've seen another nice uptick in listeners here in the last couple of weeks. So feels like everybody's getting fired up for Q4 and trade show season and end of year and all those things as new stuff comes out in our industry. The lull of summer is starting to end. So hope everybody's doing well. I'll wrap it up. Talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.